Shalom Chaverot, and welcome to a 2017 first edition of Talking Tachlis from the Wizo offices in the heart of gorgeous and chilly Tel Aviv. And with me today is the fabulous and delightful Dr. Elana Heideman, the Executive Director of Israel Forever. Dr. Heideman, welcome to Talking Tachlis.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, among the many things, the many topics and the many areas of Zionism and Judaism and all things Israel that you are an expert of, we were talking earlier on that we are facing three quite significant dates. There are more, but we have three very, very significant dates in our diary this year. And one is the 50 years of the unification of Jerusalem. The other is 70 years of the partition plan. But the biggie is the centenary, 100 years since the Balfour Declaration. And I know that you have a lot planned for this event. Can you tell our Chaverot all about it?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for, first of all, bringing us here, and I'm very excited to be able to address the women of Wizo, an organization that has always inspired me since I was a young Zionist leader, and seeing the women and how passionate they are for the cause. I think that the Balfour anniversary and the Balfour Declaration itself actually is in sync with the same passion that many of us who are activists share, and what drives us to continue to want to do more. The Balfour Declaration in 1917 was a massive turning point in history. Not because there were not steps taken for the many decades beforehand towards the fulfillment of the Zionist dream, but this was the first political and public and international recognition of not only the Zionist movement, but also our rights to the land, our rights to our indigenous return, and our rights to dream of having a revival of a Jewish sovereign state within this land that has always been connected to the Jewish people. Lord Balfour himself, having been what we would call today a Christian Zionist, believed strongly in the Jewish Association. He had a personal understanding of that history because Christians then always knew the land of Israel, the Jewish people. It was tied together in spite of our more than 2,000 years in exile. So we at the Israel Forever Foundation, almost one of the first initiatives that we created when we came to revive our programming about 5 years ago, the Balfour Initiative was something that I wanted to launch as a response to the increasing attempts to delegitimize those rights that we inherit, that these are our birthright, that every single Jew can take ownership of. Well, Balfour demonstrates that it's not just a Jewish responsibility to protect that legitimacy and to protect that right and to give the Jewish people a platform upon which to establish this Jewish sovereign state in our ancestral land. He was but one stepping stone of the other events that some of which are also enjoying anniversaries this year, followed by, of course, the San Remo League of Nations, and then the mandate for Palestine, for the partition of Palestine. So this little stepping stone today, is it about Balfour? Not necessarily. It's about one man who decides to put his stamp, with his political position as it was, to put his stamp on a step forward. So we at Israel Forever decided to create this initiative to not only backtrack and understand the steps that were in process that brought about the Balfour Declaration and were subsequent to the Balfour Declaration, but also to demonstrate the international support that still exists today. We have a long-standing campaign to garner 1 million signatures on the Balfour Declaration. Make it your declaration. And to say, we too not only affirm that Balfour's words, we stand by them and we support them, but we are also going to protect those words and that integrity for generations to come. We are not going to let the world completely negate or distort the historical facts, not at the United Nations, not in any other body in the world, negate our historical rights that we have here. These million signatures, there are lots of petitions out there today, and we have to ask ourselves, what's really the value? What's the value of adding your name? The truth is that we are in the process, with the Balfour Centenary coming up, of creating ways that this petition can have more power, that your voice as a signatory can have more power. In what way? We're going to be disseminating this to international bodies around the world. We're going to be making this also even educational resources out of it that say, look at what happened then and look at how it's relevant today. Because if we don't address the contemporary relevance of some of these historical documents, they too will be, categorized to the dustbin of history and, unfortunately, of historical revisionism, which so much of the world is hell-bent on making happen today.
We know that Israel is now facing a period where it's virtually impossible to defeat us militarily, so the warfield, the battlefield, is moving to political law, and we've seen it very, very recently at the United Nations. But now, for our Chaverot out there, who are loud and proud and they scream it with all intent ambassadors, where can they sign the petition?
So at IsraelForever.org, which is our platform for engaging millions of people around the world throughout the year, this is where we are showcasing all of the materials related to Balfour, to understanding Balfour, its relevance, anywhere that you would like to, anything that you might like to learn about, and that's where you can put your stamp, your name, and make it your declaration too. As a member also of the Balfour Centenary Committee, which is a collaborative of many different organizations of Anglos living here in Israel, CelebrateBalfour.org is also a place where we are looking to share as many resources as possible. Why do we have so many? Because we know that we live in a world where you have to hit people from their area of interest. So if one is interested in history, or one is interested in activism, or one is interested in education, there are so many different places that we can draw people in and say, here, make a difference, protect history, be a part of it, and ensure that the legacy continues for future generations. So Balfour Initiative at IsraelForever.org. Come and sign your name. Bring it to your community wherever you are in the world. Get your schools involved. Imagine if there were 1,000 communities and all they did was each one would get 1,000 signatures. We could grow step by step towards reaching 1 million. And 1 million is like this massive number, It's kind of daunting in a way. And so some people have said, why don't you reduce that number? No, we're going to keep it big. Because we, the Jewish people today, we need a big statement to be made. And there is this organization that's doing this one and this one. But the more we work together, the more we collaborate, all the different organizations, Israel Forever, Wizo, WZO, Zionist Council, etc., 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 the list goes on, the more we can achieve. And if we break down the barriers between our organizations, and we say we have to work together, then the greater impact we can have for the sake of Israel, for the Jewish world, and for the world as a whole.
Well, I know that Wizo Chaverot have very, very loud voices, and really a number like a million is tantalizing to us. So I know all of you out there, I know you're going to go sign up immediately and help protect Jewish history and help add your voice. Now, you mentioned the Israel Forever Foundation, and I'm a great fan of the Israel Forever Foundation. I use your content as a very, very valuable resource when I have to share information with our Chaverot. And we talked about angles, and you look at Israel from a multitude of very, very exciting and very, very meaty and delicious angles. Tell our Chaverot a little bit about the Israel Forever Foundation and why somebody like me loves it so much.
Great, absolutely. It's so lovely to hear that because there are a wealth of organizations, as we've mentioned, in the world. So we do try to make a unique difference. The Israel Forever Foundation, which was actually founded 13 years ago, when Danny Ayalon was ambassador in Washington, D.C., they wanted to create an organization that was going to highlight the contributions of Israel to the world. Over the years, other organizations came about, and about 6 years ago, I wanted to revamp our vision to meet the growing needs of the diaspora Jewry in strengthening and deepening their personal connection to Israel, but more importantly, also to mobilize and say, you've read a piece of information, you've read an article, you've watched a video, what next? we try to encourage every single person to engage with Israel outside of politics, outside the conflict, and as much respect as we have for all the work of Hasbara and advocacy, it's not the end of the game. There are a lot of people out there who are not interested in being on those front lines, but they want to do something inside in the convenience and the privacy of their own lives, and they want to learn more. So we mobilize the people around the world, Jews around the world, through our content and our initiatives, and say, you can do more. Take ownership of your birthright as a virtual citizen of Israel. It gives you not only a source of pride to be identified as such, but the content that we share is personal perspectives. It is coming from the passion of our bloggers like Rolene and others around the world who want to share something more that we are not seeing in mainstream media. The personal relevance of why Israel matters to Jewish life and identity. In many ways, we call the work that we do Israel-inspired Jewish identity. We're growing it in so many different dynamic and engaging ways. We have our programs that are addressing how diaspora Jews can feel more connected to Israel. Show Israelis you care. Letters of friendship. We have also the opportunity to do the reverse, put a little of Israel into your life, plant Israel at home. For example, we have a very unique Tu B'Shvat Seder that we encourage people to run in their community, even in the comfort of their own home, just with friends or family, so that you can explore the celebration of Israel through our long history of the connection to this land and the trees that we're celebrating every year on Tu B'Shvat. Of the plenitude of initiatives that we have, we try to address each one a different arena of interest. Again, knowing that the Jewish world is very diverse, everybody has their own area that maybe attracts them. So, being a foodie, I know that you are, cooking Israel, a lot of people come and they're looking just for recipes that they can bring a little taste of Israel into their kitchen. Reading Israel, our virtual library and book club, where we try to encourage people to look at different books about Israel, but also giving them the resources that they need to understand behind the writing. So there's really a wealth to what we're trying to do and what I believe we've been successful in doing over the last few years, and always looking to grow more and to impact more lives.
Well, Mazel Tov on a bar mitzvah year, 13 years.
Thank you, yes.
There you've heard of Chaverot, there's even cooking. I know our Chaverot out there, through various federations, have the most fabulous cookbooks. I think maybe you should share some of your recipes.
Yes, we actually have an ongoing call for Israel-inspired recipes, and you can be featured, so you can always send in any of your recipes to us, and it would be just another example of how important and how effective collaborations can be. You send us your recipes, we get to not only promote you and your delicious cooking, but we also get to promote Wizo at the same time.
Now, speaking of cooking up fabulous collaborations, you were very, very privileged to study and be a protege of somebody who is very, very much loved and respected still today, nearly a year after his passing, the late Elie Wiesel, Zichrono Livracha, may he rest in peace. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to study and to learn from this real giant and human rights icon of the Jewish world?
Absolutely. It was truly an honor. I was selected to study with Professor Wiesel. I was with him for over 11 years and was the only doctoral student of the professor who researched and worked specifically on the personal experience in the Holocaust. As most of you know, Elie Wiesel, he has become an icon of Holocaust memory and the Holocaust experience. And so in my years of study with him, I had the unique opportunity to hear his very personal insights into the value of memory and the value of suffering and the value of the pain that even I myself and others who are Holocaust educators have a responsibility to transmit. He often asked me, how can you teach without causing your students pain? Sharing with me actually an anecdote of his own, of the very first time that he ever taught a class of his own on the Holocaust at the City University of New York, and that at the end of his first class, nobody moved. They were still in their seats. And he realized at that point the degree of pain that we transmit when we transmit Holocaust memory. The experience that I shared with him over my 11 years of study were powerful, meaningful, and also were an impetus also to the work that I do at Israel Forever. Because as he and I agreed very often, and we disagreed a lot as well, which was very fun, memory is as good as the action that is created out of it. And so as I continue my work as a Holocaust educator, I also continue sharing the message that he shared with me. Yes, we do all become the witnesses to the witness. But we also bear a responsibility not just to bear witness to the events of the Holocaust, but to protect their integrity. Many efforts today in Holocaust education, unfortunately, are de-Judaized. If we take the Jew out of the story, it's easier to share. It's more universal. There are more and more classes about the Holocaust, which their emphasis is primarily on comparative genocide, as opposed to a study of the Holocaust, which in and of itself is an anomaly of human behavior, of evil, and how evil takes shape within social environments. And it deserves study on its own, for its own sake, just as much as every genocide is deserving of study on its own and for its own sake, because indeed we actually learn more for the sake of the future by understanding and identifying the distinctions than by drawing generalized parallels across the board, which we see is becoming more and more prevalent every day. So in my work with Wiesel, it was, again, not only an honor, but I feel a unique obligation to carry on that legacy and those messages of his, that we cannot strip the victims or the survivors of the integrity in their experience, the uniqueness of their experience both then and after, and what Holocaust memory should be for future generations.
I'm glad you bring that up, because we have spoken about very, very significant anniversaries and dates that will happen this year. We've also spoken about attempts to delegitimize the state of Israel, the historical and indigenous connection of the Jewish people to their country, at a time where levels of anti-Semitism are rising astronomically around the world. Just this weekend, we've heard about schools across the United States and even in the UK where there were bomb threats at Jewish community centers. We see the rise of what is now being called the alternative right in America. We take that vow, never again, very, very seriously. As we approach the 27th of January, and it's not Yom HaShoah, and I must make that very, very clear to our viewers out there that we here in Israel and across the Jewish world, we have a day specifically for remembering the Holocaust, and in my opinion we should remember it every single day and endeavor to educate every day. But on this very, very significant international day, how can we best educate, especially communities outside of our own, on the importance of memory and on the importance of the lessons that we have learned from the Holocaust?
I think it's a great question. Let's address first the fact of why this day was chosen. January 27th was the date that the Red Army, the Soviet Army, liberated Auschwitz. But the Holocaust did not end that day. And murders continued for another 3, some would say 4 complete months. So why do we as Jews celebrate this day at all? We have a Memorial Day of our own, being on Yom HaShoah, and the juxtaposition of those 2 days is very interesting. By the time Auschwitz was liberated, you actually have very few Jews still there. There were, of course, Jews who were liberated from Birkenau and Auschwitz on that day, but the majority had actually been marched out in death marches starting 6 weeks prior, and were liberated several months later in the camps that were in Germany. Another important fact is actually that the Soviets didn't begin the liberation with the liberation of Auschwitz, but rather had already liberated Majdanek almost 7 months prior. So it's interesting that this date was chosen. Why? Not only because of the liberation of a camp, but rather because it was the liberation of the largest camp at that time and the largest mechanism for extermination that had been in existence. Mind you, another dilemma with having it be associated and relegated specifically just to the liberation of Birkenau is it forgets, in much of Holocaust history, it enables people to forget also the extermination centers where so many millions of Jews had been murdered directly, where there was not also life within the dynamic of the camp. In Birkenau, it was a combination. There was, of course, the gassings that we are quite familiar with, and there were those who were selected not for death, but rather for slow death, and the daily reality that they had to face in such circumstances. So how do we as a Jewish community balance between the memory of January 27th, International Holocaust Memorial Day, and that of Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance and Martyrs Day, Martyrs and Heroes Day, as it's come to be known throughout the Jewish world, which for those of you who don't know is actually commemorating the onset of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Back in the very early years of Israeli memory on the Holocaust, Yom HaShoah was about the heroism, and it was about those survivors who had the wherewithal, or those Jews during the Holocaust who had the wherewithal to be involved in an uprising movement. Nowadays, of course, we understand that resistance to the Nazi attempt to dehumanize and exterminate our people took on many shapes, and it was not just in the form of physical resistance. And Holocaust memory throughout the world, throughout the Jewish world, has changed to reflect that over the years. But we still remain with this distinction of an International Holocaust Memorial Day, which is very universal in its message, and Yom HaShoah, which is very Jewish and particular in its message. Yom HaShoah will always continue to be the Holocaust Remembrance Day for the Jewish people. But we are lucky to have a day where the international community can address these similar topics of memory, but in a way that they feel more comfortable doing. Meaning they're simply more comfortable addressing the Holocaust in its universal, shall we say, de-Judaized form. Do we take a moment out of our day and stand silently? No. Are there Holocaust memorial ceremonies in Jewish communities around the world on January 27th? For the most part, almost not at all. They are very general. They happen in many churches I know, hold events on this day, and public schools use this day because they don't want to use the Yom HaShoah Day of significance. So it's our responsibility, I believe, to find a way, especially of the women of Wizo, who I know do also possess a unique perspective because they've been involved you have been involved for so many years in promoting Holocaust memory as an integral part of our engagement as a Jewish community and as it relates to our connection to Israel. I think that we have an opportunity to utilize International Holocaust Memorial Day to draw attention to the distinctions between the Holocaust and other genocides of the world, that we can emphasize the uniqueness of what was the Holocaust so that we can negate all of these attempts to create these simple parallels. For example, the legal, systematic campaign for extermination has never been replicated by any other genocidal event in history. There have been recent claims even about what's happening in Syria. Significant individuals who have called it a Holocaust. It is not. It is indeed a genocide. But if we are able as a Jewish community to address the particularity of the Holocaust and to use this international day as a way to draw attention how the particular relates to the universal, then we are not simply casting the particular aside and relegating that only to Jewish memory. We are demonstrating to the world how we can tie these messages together for the sake of a future that very fast is becoming desensitized and absolutely, shall we say, ignorant and indifferent to what the Holocaust was to what its uniqueness was, what the uniqueness of the Jewish experience was, and how it relates to all human beings in the world, not just to the Jewish community.
And we can find a lot of those educational resources at the Israel Forever Foundation. Again, that email address.
IsraelForever.org. Come visit us today, come visit us every day for a little bit of inspiration, whether you are in Israel or wherever you are in the world. Stand proudly as a virtual citizen of Israel. Put that stamp into your own identity and share it with the world, and come and explore the immense amount of content, initiatives, and other resources that we have that can deepen and mobilize your personal connection to Israel.
Chaverim v'chaverot, you heard it right here on Talking Tachlis. I would like to thank my guest today, Dr. Elana Heideman from the Israel Forever Foundation, the Executive Director of the Israel Foundation Forever, and my fabulous lady behind the camera, Monique Asher, and I look forward to seeing a lot of you later this month at our meeting of representatives.